Assalamu alaikum. Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar on what is the obvious topic. We are passing through days, hours, weeks that is quite foundational, that is quite transformative, or that is going to define the regional politics in the coming period. What has happened over the last weekend, the Hamas surprise attack on October 7, is once again redefining the whole regional politics, the nature of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the nature of the Israel's regional normalization, the Middle East intra-Middle East relations, and as well as the Middle East relation with international powers. Today, we will be trying to unpack this event with a great lineup of speakers that you see on the screens. We will be discussing this first with Ustaz Waddah Khamfar, the president of Al-Sharq Forum. We have Fadi Quran, the campaign director of Avaz. We have David Hurst, who is the editor-in-chief of Middle East Eye. We were going to also have Francesca Albanese, but she could not make it given the volatile nature of the situation and given her position as being the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine, so she had to apologize quite briefly, quite a while ago, so therefore she will not be joining us. So we will be discussing this with the existing speakers here, and it is going to be a 1-hour sessions that will intend to be more conversational rather than presentation style, and we will appreciate your also feedback question in the course of this webinar. This is the first webinar of a series that will look at this situation, and there will be weekly webinars on the same subjects. So therefore, please remain tuned in and follow these webinars and try to understand the nature of this conflict and how it is defining the Israel-Palestine conflict, but also the regional politics and international politics at large. So without further ado, I will be returning to our speaker. First speaker will be Ustaz Waddah. So there has been quite many media focus on the subject, but I think one major question is still needs explanation, how we got here. So how did we end up where we are now? So that is the fundamental question. So please, floor is yours, Ustaz Waddah.
Thank you very much, Ghalib. I would like to start by that a lot of people feel surprised that this has happened. In fact, in my opinion, what happened is basically a natural evolution of a process that was faulty, a process that only yield such a result. The surprise in the scale, the surprise that in the way that Hamas has been able to infiltrate the Israeli border army and to surprise the Israeli intelligence and the scale of it and the few hours of total collapse and absence of the Israeli capability to respond and to interact with it. But am I surprised that people imprisoned for 16 years in an open jail like the one in Gaza, deprived from almost every basic human necessity? Am I surprised that they are trying to do something about it? Am I surprised that the Palestinians, who are supposed to be today celebrating the 25th anniversary of their state based on Oslo Agreement, which was signed in September 1993, and it said in that agreement that in 5 years, the final settlement should have been reached. It means that 25 years ago, we should have had a Palestinian state, and today Palestinians are happy that they have their own state. Am I surprised that Palestinians who have reached this deadlock in the so-called peace process are always and continuously going to resist and going to oppose the continuous attempt by the international powers and by the Israelis to contain them and to restrain them and to restrict them into certain narrow dimension of looking at them as basic humans who might live, even now they say they're not humans, animals. who do not deserve but the minimal to keep them alive, as if they are in a zoo and you are just giving them a little bit of water and food? Of course not. Am I surprised that after the government, the right-wing government of Israel, and its continuous escalation against Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, and technically the time separation in Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, and the change of the status of Al-Aqsa Mosque which has been there for decades, am I surprised that people will express their rejection to that and revolt against it? Of course not. So basically, whoever is surprised, he's surprised because he thought that Palestinians, more and more pressure on them will make them totally surrender and accept whatever has been dictated upon them, regardless of any word called justice, anything called dignity, anything called their sense of belonging to the land, and their sense of revolting against any injustice. Of course, I mean, this is unfortunately the Western paradigm that has been always looking at the Palestinians like this, and always surprised by the intifada, surprised by the attempt to resist, surprised by the rejection of a humiliation. Unfortunately, this is how it was, and this is what led us to this. So what we see today is a natural evolution of a process where the Palestinians have been marginalized in it. And beside that, a new approach to the region has emerged, whereby normalization of relationship with some countries in the region, supposed to replace the concept of looking at the core of the issue, which is the Palestinians. Palestinians today say, again, we are at the center of events. You cannot establish order in this region as long as the Palestinians do not have their basic rights respected, and they do not have the political right as well, because the issue is not about a humanitarian case of residents on certain territory and land. It's a matter of politics. The people of Gaza were restrained in that particular jail, but at the same time, there was an attempt to convert Gaza into an entity separated from the national aspiration of the Palestinians in total. It means it shouldn't play any political role. We will just keep them barely alive, barely surviving, so they do not have anything to do with the West Bank. They have nothing to do with Jerusalem. They have nothing to do with the Palestinian cause at large. Now, again, the Palestinians are saying, you know what? This is what we're supposed to do. And Palestinian issue, with its political dimension, with its essence, as an occupation by colonial settlers who have established an apartheid state on that territory, on that land, we are not going to accept this. We are going to always continue to revolt against it. So instead of us looking at the details of what has happened, at the beginning, I would like to mention that if we continue to look at the situation from that particular angle of trying to make Israel survive regardless of what the Palestinians receive this conflict by normalizing relationship with regimes in the region who are doing it not for the sake of the interest of their people or the sake of the interest of the Palestinians, but the sake of their own survival. As long as that paradigm is there, we are going to see more and more, not only violence or clashes or surprises or military resistance, but we might even see a spillover of that to the entire region. You know, and I know that this region at this moment in time is very volatile, very volatile. Economically, we have regimes who are not managing their countries very well, and they are accused of corruption. And at the same time, they are losing legitimacy day after another. When it comes to politics, we have dead end. After the Arab Spring, there is no hope that this region is moving towards democracy. Unfortunately, after that process has been destroyed and killed. And third, also when it comes to the balance of power, I think the region itself is part of this remaking of the international world order, reprioritizing the international priorities. Now China is emerging, Russia, Ukrainian war, and many other things. So the international powers have been prioritizing their strategic interest outside this region. At this moment in time, there is a huge volatility. And in my opinion, if this conflict is not looked upon in that comprehensive, new, fresh idea outside the narrow-minded approach, eventually this conflict not only will be inside Palestine, but it will spill over and will expand to engulf the entire region. And it will affect not only the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but it will go beyond that into much bigger dimensions that I don't think the Americans in particular and many other international powers are ready at this moment in time to deal with it.
I think that's pretty much the previous idea, whether the Palestinian issue was the core, or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was the core issue of the regional politics, or whether it was a side issue. For a long time, there was a tendency to think that the Palestinian issue can be set aside and then the regional normalization can proceed without any regard to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And what we are seeing now, basically, is that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remained the core issue of the region, and whatever the regional normalization that is proceeding with no regard to this file will basically bump the road in one stage or another. So from here to you, Fadi, basically how, if we took this issue, put in a larger context, national, regional, and international context, how this context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict were evolving in recent years, and how it is changing after this attack, or after this recent escalation.
Thank you, Ghalib, for the great question. I think what we're seeing right now are massive paradigm shifts on all three levels, the international, the regional, and the national. On the international level, one of the core paradigm shifts that's been underway is recognizing that Israel is an apartheid state. Pretty much any serious person, observer that has expertise on this topic has seen that Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, even some Israeli organizations, B'Tselem, and the Palestinians have been saying this for decades, that Israel is an apartheid state, that Israel practices settler colonialism. And that within the broader narrative of Palestine and what this is, the shift from this is a conflict between two people over real estate to this is one nation committing the crime of apartheid against another nation and that needs to end is something that is changing. And we saw even in the speech that was given by Hamas's leader, Dif, who spoke to Israel being an apartheid state as he was speaking to the international community. So that is changing. And although it hasn't changed on the level of government positions, although some governments, if you look at their statements at the UN, are beginning to recognize it, it's a clear trajectory. The other big paradigm shift, though, that we're seeing in the opposite direction, and as relates to Israel-Palestine, is the rise of far-right ethno-nationalism. These regimes, particularly in Europe and the US, these different parties and actors that want to focus on a white supremacy, that want to focus on, if you look at Le Pen in France, this idea of certain French supremacy, the rise of this type of politics associated also with Zionism and the ethno-nationalism that Zionism presents has indicated to the Israeli level that this kind of facade of being a democracy that Israel often claimed is not needed anymore. Israel can be a ethnocratic fascist state and say so publicly, as we see in Benny Gvir's statements and other statements, because there are these many rising on the international level actors that recognize and support that and actually see Israel's ethno-nationalism as a role model. And that gives space for Palestinians to mobilize more clearly against this larger threat. And last but not least, to the point that Mr. Waddah spoke to, we're also seeing the democratization of the international world order, with the US being seen as less effective, weaker in the Middle East, but also more internationally, and seeing countries like China, seeing South Africa, Brazil, and others becoming more vocal and even challenging to the US's main hegemonic narrative, is also shifting the relations on the ground and the perceptions of what is possible in the context of liberation in Palestine. And so those international shifts are also then being reflected into regional paradigm shifts. The most central regional paradigm shift that we're seeing is, of course, this idea of dictatorships in the region trying to consolidate. And many people speak about normalization deals with Israel, whether it's the UAE or Bahrain, but those are not peace deals or even normalization deals. Those are mainly weapons agreements and trade agreements so that these different regimes can find ways to consolidate their power, and also so that they can have some level of deterrence vis-a-vis Iran. But what that's leading to in the region is Palestinians are beginning to realize that any hope they had that their Arab brothers or Arab nations will be their saviors is a hope that will not materialize. So Palestinian politics has now shifted largely, apart from, of course, the official politics of the PA, Mahmoud Abbas, and the PLO leadership, which is we've seen in the last week how irrelevant they are. Apart from them, most Palestinian society has now shifted, and this happened since the Sheikh Jarrah uprising in 2021. Palestinian youth and society has shifted to the sense of our freedom is not going to come from outside. We're going to need to take agency into our own hands. The other regional shift that I think is very crucial to mention here is that there is very significant, let's say, shattering that's happening in some of the regimes in the region. And whether we look at, for example, Egypt right now, which for many people, the assumption was that Egypt was going to be stable, but we see as the elections are getting near, that Sisi has some credible challenger, that Egypt is extremely unstable at this moment, and the majority of Egyptians are no longer standing or seen to be standing with Sisi. We also see that in a bunch of other countries in the region, Morocco, for example, after the earthquake, etc. So these regional shifts are also giving Palestinians the context that even though normalization is happening, we have large Arab populations that are not only unhappy with their dictators, but that have maintained a very deep pro-Palestinian stance. And what happened in the World Cup in Qatar, I think, was the biggest example of that, where we saw Palestinian flags rising. And this grassroots support for the Palestinian cause that's becoming more visible across the Arab street as people become more angry at their dictators is something that I think we're going to see repercussions and surprises, just like we saw in Gaza, come to the fore sooner rather than later. We're already seeing in Jordan, for example, Jordanian tribes and communities organizing to march down to the border as the war on Gaza intensifies. And we already saw that tens of thousands in previous cases got to the border. And it's a question what's going to happen if this continues to escalate. And so last but not least, and for me, what is the most important paradigm shift here and regional question that affects us as Palestinians is we have a succession moment coming up in Palestine right now. President Mahmoud Abbas, it's unclear how long he will be present. It's unclear how relevant he is. And the question of who comes next is on every Palestinian's minds. And what we're seeing in Gaza today is an indicator that the PA and its kind of supporters are losing more and more relevance in the ground. But even before what happened in Gaza, we have seen across the West Bank, and we're seeing today, many Palestinians self-organize, whether it was groups like the Lions Den, whether it was groups like in Jenin, Palestinians are self-organizing with this deep belief that we as a people can achieve our own liberation, and with the sense of agency that we are going to move and resist together. And now with this hope that this liberation is actually possible, a new level of imagination where it's not just resisting to survive, it's resisting to achieve freedom. And this paradigm shift is something that I believe is really huge and is going to have continued repercussions on the whole region, but particularly on the streets in Palestine.
Hadi, just a question here before I move to David. it is important that you brought the PA dimension into the conversation. And this is a dimension that is both absent but talked about at the same time. So how the PA, the Palestinian Authority as a structure or as a body going to emerge from this process? What's going to happen to it?
I mean, that is the big question. What the PA has been doing on the ground over the last weeks is that it's been arresting Palestinians that have, been organizing or mobilizing to help support Gaza. But the truth is that for the PA, there is an effort that's being supported by some actors, including the US and Israel, to maintain the stability of the PA, particularly by seeking to place people like Hussein al-Sheikh or a few others as the kind of clear followers of Mahmoud Abbas to hold his position. But what's happening right now is that the PA is not relevant in any type of decisions apart from one, which is the distribution of the financial aid that the Palestinian people receive. And the fact that the PA employs over 300,000 Palestinians that rely mainly on this international aid. So apart from that need for them for economic stability, what is really the question on, I'd say, every Palestinian's mind is how do we ensure that this moment when Mahmoud Abbas's succession happens, that the people who come in his place are people who represent the Palestinian people and the strategy that the Palestinian people want in pursuit of liberation, and not a continuation of the status quo that has brought us to the situation where we now see many people in Gaza suffering, but also centrally in the West Bank, the ongoing Nakba and ethnic cleansing. Over 4 Palestinian villages have been destroyed, let's remember, just in the last 3 months alone by Israel. And the settlement expansion is at an all-time high. So again, the PA is irrelevant apart from being a financial distributor. The main thing that we're going to have to decide is the future of the PLO post-Mahmoud Abbas. And that is something that after what happened in Gaza, after what's happening now, is going to be much more difficult for him to try and sustain his legacy.
David, for quite a long time, there was a talk about the growing divergence between the Arab states and then the Arab regimes. And one issue that usually people point to when it comes to this divergence was the Palestine, arguing that the Palestine still remains a main issue for the Arab state, but the Arab regime wants to actually put this aside, and then this normalization will try to normalize the relation as much as possible. And then the big prize was supposed to be Saudi-Israeli normalization. So what do you expect on this normalization front? The regional normalization process will evolve from now onward.
Okay, I'll try and answer that. Before the breakout from Gaza, which, by the way, no one close to Hamas in the diaspora knew about, the only narrative for the region was to build an 8-lane flyover over the Palestinian search for justice and equality by getting an Arab state like Saudi Arabia, a big state, a rich state, to normalize with Israel. I, for one, was a skeptic and still am, not because I thought that Mohammed bin Salman remotely cared. One of the distinctions of the handover of power from the older generation of prince to the younger is the complete loss of interest, the total indifference to the Palestinian file. However, I still think it's more trouble for Mohammed bin Salman than it's worth. He's currently enjoying the limelight, having emerged from the killing of Khashoggi probably stronger than before, because he can now play China, Russia, and America off each other. Exactly like the United Arab Emirates being the entrepot for blood diamonds and blood gold from Sudan en route to Russia. America's allies are in the perfect position to do the dirty on America while pretending to be part of the alliance. For America, the central motivation of normalization is also geopolitical. It's to keep the richest Gulf states in the Western orbit, even though I think they have probably psychologically already left it. For Israel, normalization with Arab states never has been, never is, never will be about seeking stability with equal partners. It's about cementing its place as a dominant military and high-tech state in the region. This is a goal shared amongst all of Israel's tribes and warring elites. But for the dominant nationalist religious strain, it's also about declaring total victory of the Zionist project. And this is what Netanyahu was doing when he said that we were on the cusp of peace at the United Nations General Assembly. He was brandishing a map that eradicated Palestine. Now, how has the Gaza breakout changed this? Well, the first and immediate effect is to show everyone how, in a real emergency, how worthless these peace treaties are. Israeli tourists have been killed. Israeli diplomats have been withdrawn from Jordan. So that's the two Arab countries who were first to recognize Israel. Before that, the 300-mile border between Jordan and Israel, which was one of the quietest and has now become a route for arms smuggling, is the project of a latest Israeli attempt to build a huge long wall along it. So on paper, there's no state of war. In reality, Jordanians need a visa, and if you're young, you don't get it. So as the genocide of Gaza takes place, and I think we're only at the start of the process of mass killing, Egypt is blocking the only exit 2.3 million people have to escape. Jordan can't accept more Palestinians without breaking apart, and it's an essential, existential question for Jordan. In Tunisia, there are mass demonstrations, in Morocco too. The dictators who run all these countries know that they can't hold this tidal wave of support back. They are slightly more canny than we sometimes portray them as being. But on this issue, this demonstrates another cracked, failed assumption of normalization, which was a deal with elites would somehow bring the nations, the peoples of the Arab state along. And it's not the case. It's the popular hatred of Israel is greater than ever before. And this hatred will increase as Israel treats Gazans, fellow Arabs, Palestinians as animals, which they will do. They will be absolutely true to their word. And they already have started doing that. And Israel and Gaza will be totally cut off from the outside world. The internet only works there 20%, and it'll be a black hole. We'll all be sitting around it, wondering what has happened to our correspondence, what has happened to our information, what has happened to anything in a few days, maybe weeks' time. But as the ground assault develops, that is the paradigm. So what happens now? Excuse me. What happens now? Well, that will depend on exactly what happens in Gaza, whether Gaza ignites a regional war with Hezbollah, and how Israel copes with it and stops it. What does Netanyahu mean by peace will not be the same again? And just how many Gazans are going to die? And will Hamas be forced to go underground? We don't know any of the answers to these questions.
Mm-hmm.
But my guess is that the flame of the third intifada has now been lit absolutely and irrevocably. And there will be permanent unrest in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and in 48. This will be a fact on the ground that no peace treaty with any Arab country can cement over. It's just one final point.
Mm-hmm.
Netanyahu said that Palestinians cannot have a veto over peace in the country. Hamas has now demonstrated that stability in the region, that the Palestinians have a veto over stability of the region, whether Israel wants it or not. And the fundamental battle at play is between the will of the Palestinians to resist and stay on their land and Israel's will to dominate. Place these two forces next to each other, and the will of the native indigenous people will always win against the fundamentally colonial European structure. Yes, I know French Jews are flying to Israel to fight for a Jewish state, but yes, the will of Palestine will prevail whether it takes 2 or 3 decades. We're only at the calm before the storm, but this storm, in my view, cannot now be stopped.
So, David, basically you see a third intifada being on the horizon and looming, and also what is going to happen in Gaza might actually ignite or trigger a region-wide instability, if not conflict. So quite ominous. So, Ustaz Waddah, I mean, in the first rounds, we tried to see how we have arrived where we are now. But the most important question or pressing question at this stage, where we do go from now, like where we do go from here, and what scenarios do you see to be on the horizon? Please unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
To summarize the situation as it is, we agree that the core issue of the Middle East is the Palestinian issue. This is no doubt about it. Whatever normalization attempts by the Americans or the Israelis to break away from this fact to continue to exist. And you remember that the first agreement of normalization was done in the late 70s with Egypt. And since then, the situation on the ground didn't change, and the situation in the region actually did not change, but actually it escalated. So this is, in my opinion, something as a fact and the departure point of our discussion. The second issue, the center of the Palestinian issue, is the fact that occupation continues. So if we do not address the issue of occupation, we are not addressing the issue of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And it is extremely vital and important to go back into the original discourse of saying, if we do not end this occupation, we are going to continue having a major conflict one after another. The third important issue, the trigger which has led to the current situation, is Al-Aqsa Mosque, which in my opinion is very central, not only in the Palestinian mind and collective consciousness, but also in the Arab and Muslim world and even the Christian world. So the issue here is this government has actually ignored first that the core issue is Palestine. It has ignored anything related to political demands of liberation or ending of occupation, and it has destroyed every barrier when it comes to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and Jerusalem, and this is why we find ourselves in this position. When we are talking about Al-Aqsa Mosque, and this particular operation by Hamas has been called the flood of Al-Aqsa, which is also sending a message not only to the Palestinians, but also to the entire Islamic world, that Al-Aqsa cannot be tolerated. And in my opinion, this is something that will never be accepted by anyone in this region, even if all governments or regimes try to negotiate something, but eventually this is a very crucial issue. If we are going to do something, learn a result, learn a lesson from what is happening right now, we need to correct the path of looking at the Palestinian issue. We need to start discussing the occupation, the end of this colonial secular regime, the end of this apartheid regime, and have a serious one. Now, Israel could succeed in the next few days of crushing Gaza. They might, because they have a huge amount of artillery, they have air jets, and they have the support of the Americans, as you may have seen during the last few days. But the issue is, even if you crush Gaza, and you have done this many times for now, this might be even bigger scale. We might have tens of thousands of people massacred in Gaza. But the issue is the following: is this going to end the Palestinian cause? Of course not. Now, always the Israelis feel that we have not killed enough. So if we kill more, then eventually the people will be suppressed. I think for the last 60 years or so, we are aware, all of us, of the failure of this particular thinking. This is a racist thinking, which is a result of all the failures that the Israelis are encountering, and the failure of the international society as well, that given the impunity to the Israelis to slaughter and to kill as much as they like in order to satisfy their domestic needs or their political needs or their illusion that we can control this land by killing more than what we have killed previously. This actually will trigger even much stronger, resilient approach from the Palestinians themselves and from the entire region. As I said, the region today is not the region of 10 years ago.
Can I pose two interrelated? Can I pose two interrelated questions at this stage? Because in your counting of the reasons, it's very important. It's very striking, the disconnect between the international level and what you are referring to. All the causes, all the emphases that you have made, very much related to the Palestine and Palestine-Israel level. Like for instance, almost there is no talk about Iran, whereas at the international level, more than Palestine level discussions, there is more Iran level discussion. So how would you make sense of this? And also, what do you expect, how the nature of occupation is likely to evolve, change from now onward?
So let me put it as it is. Now, a lot of media, especially in Western media and the pro-Israeli media, are putting the blame on Iran, on what's happening right now in Gaza, as if Hamas is acting on behalf of the Iranians. I think everyone in this region knows that this is not the truth. This operation has been surprising to everyone, to the Iranians, to the Israelis, to the Palestinians, even to Palestinian leaders, even to Hamas political leaders maybe. So it's not something that has been done on behalf of anyone or for the sake of anyone. It is a natural evolution of events on the ground, and it's a natural response to what we have been witnessing during the last few years. And in my opinion, Iran could use this for its benefit. That is what could happen. That doesn't mean that Iran is behind it. That means that Iran is smart enough to utilize whatever situation in this region for its own interest. And that is something different from the fact that this is a matter of a Palestinian-centered operation that has started because of Palestinian situation, not because of the Iranian pressure. The second point, which is important, the West, in its attempt to contain Iran, for example, they have overlooked the fact that people, Palestinian people on the ground, they have their own will, and they have done much from the first intifada and the second intifada and all the confrontations with the Israelis and Sheikh al-Jarrah and many other wars in Gaza. All that was done because of Palestinian people, aspiration for liberation and for dignity. It was not done because any force, actually all the forces practically were against that. I mean, even initially, maybe some Arab sympathy was there, official sympathy, I mean, but that doesn't exist now. But this will continue to generate. So what Fadi said is right. The Palestinians have realized that this is something that they have to do with themselves. They are not before, maybe during Jamal Abdel Nasser time, and after that, there was a theory that Palestinians are going to act in order to, trigger the support from the Arab world, and the Arabs and the, Islamic world will come and liberate Palestine, not the Palestinians. I think this theory does not exist anymore. I think now the Palestinians, the new generation, this is the third and fourth generation after the occupation, have realized that they are going to do it themselves. And they are doing it in the way that you have seen, which surprised everyone, including those who have been very close to monitoring the situation on the ground. Palestinians, Israelis, international society, Iranians, Arabs, everyone is surprised by the amount of success that this operation achieved during the first day. Because in my opinion, Hamas won this battle, won it the first few hours, regardless of what Israel is going to do today, regardless of the killing that and destruction and genocide that might happen in Gaza. The idea that Hamas sent to the world that this so-called army that can never be defeated, and the Israeli intelligence, which has been trying to project a huge influence, not only in the region, but internationally, through cooperating with governments, cooperating with dictators across the world. In my opinion, that image has been shattered. Psychologically, this is a turning point in the conflict. We should not, this reminds me of the Tet invasion, when North Vietnamese tried to invade Southern Vietnamese, and they shocked the Americans by a surprising attack. The Americans succeeded in suppressing the Northern Vietnamese, but that moment was a moment that turned the conflict into something new, that encouraged the new psychology, created the new trends, and also reshaped the priorities of everyone in the region, including the internal components in the Palestinian scene, like the Palestinian National Authority and many other factors. In my opinion, from now on, we don't know exactly how it's going to be played the next few days. But from now on, we can say that the 7th of October is a moment of turning point in this conflict. And in my opinion, the Palestinians have brought back the cause, their cause, to be the central issue in this region, and to be an international issue that should be addressed urgently by any international power that is hoping to reshape the new world order in the way that it would like it to happen. America cannot ignore this anymore. The international society cannot ignore it anymore. Otherwise, the destabilization in the new world order, or the order that the Americans and the Chinese and the Russians, whoever is trying to build, is not going to be actually established unless this issue is addressed and it has put itself at the center of attention of the world and the center of attention of the region, and definitely at the center of the Palestinian self-confidence to continue their struggle.
Many questions has come to the chat box, so I will be posing to all of you, but since you are here, let me pose two questions briefly to you, and then I will go to Fadi and David, because there are many questions that will be for them as well. Very briefly, how this, how this normalization, or the countries that have already normalized relation with Israel, how will this recent development will affect this process and prospect of normalization? And secondly, again, briefly, there's a question about the two-state solution, whether this recent conflict will once again bring the two-state solution framework at the international level. I can maybe add another question to it. Will it revive the two-state solution, or will it actually further be seen as a proof of the death of the two-state solution?
So maybe I will just ask the second question and leave the first question for Fadi
and David.
Now, the second issue is, what do I expect? I expect the Americans to behave exactly the way that they have been behaving. That they are looking at the situation, they are going to say, oh, we need to give life to the peace process. And this is the terminology that we Palestinians and many people in the region are sick and fed up of listening to. And okay, we are going to empower the Palestinian National Authority because we cannot negotiate with a terrorist organization like Hamas. Therefore, we will negotiate with the Palestinian National Authority. Let us give them more power. Let us equip them with the necessary security forces and the training, and give them a little bit of money and budget. Then we negotiate with them a peace process, just to pass the moment. We are sure that given the circumstances, if there is no radical shift beyond what has been done until now, we are not going to see an end for this conflict. You are giving people some tablet of aspirin or something like that to ease the suffering for a while and to give them hope. Palestinians, I think, are immune right now to that kind of tactic that has been used repeatedly in a huge failure and even in a very disgraceful manner, actually, because I think we should not undermine the intelligence of the Palestinians or the intelligence of the people in this region. People are aware of all these kind of tactics. You know, we need a real departure from that into a track whereby you are really trying to enforce something on the ground to end this occupation, to establish something new. And also the two-state solution is also a terminology which has been devoid from every kind of sense and meaning. This is a concept which has died because the Israelis have systematically made sure that this cannot happen on the ground. In West Bank, with the settlements, the control over not only the land, but also the water and the resources and the settlers everywhere. So what kind of two-state solution are we going to talk about? So again, this kind of approach is a repetition of failure. As the international society did it before, the Americans in particular, and with the help of the Israelis and some regimes in the region, is not going to succeed. A new imagination, new way of looking at it should emerge. A new courageous thinking about it should emerge. Otherwise, okay, this might happen now. Okay, Gaza might be contained for a reason or another, destroyed for a reason or another, but a generation after another, an attempt after another will always emerge, and always the Palestinian issue will continue to be the core in the region, and always the issue of occupation and liberation will be the center of this Palestinian issue.
Fadi, basically many question is coming up, but also let me add my own question to it. First, what the scenarios that you see to be on the horizon, but secondly, how do you see the intercommunal relationship to evolve, particularly between the 1948 or the Arab Israelis within Israel as well? Because the reports that are coming that there is a very significant process of intercommunal fighting to be on the horizon as well. But also, let me pose you the build up a bit on what Ustaz Waddah said, that probably the international temptation would be to beef up the PA and give a bit more money to the PA. But there is also many expectation to the contrary. So in a sense, this process actually can breed further death into the PA. So how do you anticipate the international actors' approach to the PA, particularly given the recent EU's decision as well, first to cutting all the aid to Palestine, then reversing it? So how do you see the international picture to play out?
These are all big questions that probably require another webinar to go into detail on them.
That's what we'll do next week as well.
Yeah. Let me start with kind of what is the expectation to happen next. I think it's very clear from the language that the Israeli government is using what they want to do next. They are speaking about bringing back deterrence. There was a leak about a meeting that Netanyahu had with Biden where he spoke about basically the need to destroy Gaza because Israel needs to reclaim its sense of deterrence, which was completely shattered by the recent events in Gaza. And what that means is we're going to face a situation of massive Israeli destruction and murder of Palestinians. Now, in that scenario, I think that, and speaking with my fellow Palestinians on the ground across the West Bank, but also Palestinians in 1948, in for example, Lud and Jaffa, and you need to remember that there's still familial connections between Palestinians in 1948 and Palestinians that live in Gaza, particularly Palestinians that live in the Negev desert and the Naqab. And so my expectation is that if Israel goes along with its murderous rampage and ethnic cleansing in Gaza, we are going to see the outbreak of a Palestinian intifada. We're already seeing in the West Bank, just yesterday, there were over 100 different locations where Palestinians were clashing. We're also seeing that in areas around Lud and other Palestinian areas in 1948. Now, in that scenario, I think the world is going to have to make a decision on whether it moves towards trying to bring back to life the zombie peace process, which is a two-state solution. And everyone's going to attempt that. I mean, it's kind of like people are programmed to go in that direction, but that direction is dead. And even the PA right now, no matter how much money they get, are not going to be able to, I would say, stabilize the West Bank. Even before what happened, they were having significant trouble stabilizing the West Bank and maintaining their legitimacy. And so my expectation is there is a scenario where we begin to see either the PA collapse, or, as we're already seeing right now, many of the factions within Fatah, which is the ruling party, began to split away, including Palestinians in the security forces, and the PA security forces beginning to split away from the leading government. And this could be dangerous if it leads to intercommunal Palestinian fighting. But this is the scenario I think is most likely. There is another scenario, though, which is we could be at a moment, particularly if there are wise international interlocutors. It's important to mention that with Hamas, as people are aware, has hostages, including they've taken families into Gaza. And we also are aware that Israel is right now holding over 300 Palestinian children, and Israel yearly detains over 700 children. Also, Israel's bombing locations across Gaza, killing dozens of children. There could be a scenario where international pressure leads, for example, to a commitment from Israel to release all the detained Palestinian children and to stop targeting civilian areas where children are present, in return for Hamas releasing some of the non-military hostages that it has taken into Gaza. And that could then begin to move us towards a de-escalation of this specific conflict. But again, the Israeli government, I believe, doesn't even care about its own citizens. So the scenario where they will put their citizens' lives ahead of their thirst for blood in Gaza is unlikely, unless there's significant pressure in that direction. Now, to answer the second question about intercommunal divisions, in 1948, the Palestinians there have been, although the form of oppression that they face is different than those in the West Bank and Gaza, they still face severe racism, severe oppression. Israel allows drugs and weapons and intercommunal killing to already happen. So one of the big expectations now is just like what happened in 2021 during the Sheikh Jarrah uprising. Israel arrested thousands of Palestinians, specifically young Palestinians living in 1948 in Israel. I expect as Palestinians began to protest more against the war in Gaza in cities like Haifa and Lid and Ramla and elsewhere, we are going to see Israel conduct mass arrests, and that is going to lead to further intercommunal kind of strife in 1948. And we need to note that this is happening all in the paradigm right now, where there is intercommunal strife in Israel itself, where Israeli society is fracturing because Israeli society has realized that, essentially you can't have a Jewish state and a democracy at the same time. An ethnocentric state and a democracy do not work together. And so what we're also beginning to see, and it's very interesting, is intercommunal strife on the Jewish-Israeli side, where people are becoming more critical of Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, although there's a move to quiet that by creating a unity government that Netanyahu proposed yesterday. It's unclear whether that is going to succeed in any way in quieting those divisions. And last but not least, just to speak to your third question, Ghalib, which related to the kind of larger normalization direction that's going. The key theory against normalization for many of these Arab states that have already been cooperating with Israel, the key theory for them was that if they held back on normalizing with Israel, Israel would be under pressure to accept a two-state solution to get access to these Arab regimes' markets. Well, the two-state solution is dead. These Arab regimes are already normalizing. And the truth is what that's leading to, if you speak to Emiratis, if you speak to Moroccans on the street, they're beginning to realize they're beginning to become more critical of their government because of their decisions to normalize with Israel. And I think actually what these governments are going to realize very soon is that they were under the assumption that normalization with Israel would stabilize their countries, but the consequences are going to be quite the opposite. These different regimes are going to become more and more unstable as people realize that Israeli infiltration and businesses and actions in states like Morocco and like the Emirates are actually not harming, not benefiting the people of the Emirates. Forget about Palestine, that these relations are not benefiting Emiratis and they're not benefiting Moroccans and they're not benefiting Sudanese. So I actually think counterintuitively, this normalization process is actually benefiting in the long term the Palestinian cause, because it's making many of these populations realize that it's, the violations of dignity that Israel imposes on Palestinians are being exported to their own leaders, and that as that continues to happen, people are going to become more pro-Palestinian, not less.
Fadi, just maybe 10-second question. Do you expect any reversal of normalization as a result of this process within of this country?
I expect each country has its different situations. I expect for some countries, like for example, Sudan and Morocco, I expect that we'll see reversal of this normalization at some point relatively soon. Other countries like the Emirates and Bahrain, there are different dynamics vis-a-vis Iran. I definitely think that any hope of Saudi and normalization happening soon has been shattered by these events.
Thank you. David, Fadi also emphasized the idea of mediation emerging at some stage. So do you see any mediation efforts to be on the horizon? And more importantly, do you think who can be potentially a potential mediator at this stage, a credible potential mediator or effective mediator? And finally, the question that I posed to Fadi is also relevant for you. Do you see any reversal of this normalization to be on the horizon?
Okay, well, mediation.
And you have 5 minutes.
Okay, mediation depends on capacity to mediate, the acceptance of the third party as legitimate to all sides. And what's happened in terms of Britain and America's capacity to mediate is the exact opposite. It has weakened. Rishi Sunak said yesterday that Britain was giving its unequivocal support to Israel. This reminds me of what Blair said to Bush a year before the Iraq invasion, when he said that Britain was with you, whatever. Now, a week before, James Cleverly, the British Foreign Minister, was on a visit and he was barred by the Israeli authorities, blocked from going into a Palestinian village in Samia, which had been emptied of its residents. Now, where's the policy here? What you've got is actually Britain that has got primarily responsible for the conflict in the first place, being completely in hock, held hostage to what Israel wants and doesn't want. Therefore, it has fundamentally, conceptually, strategically, abandoned any role it has of being a mediator. So my prediction externally is that what this conflict will do will diminish the ability of America and Britain to mediate. So who are the potential mediators? I would say principally Egypt and Jordan, and Bahrain, the weakened Arab states, but also Doha. But when you have the West in this mode of this is an existential blow to us all, as if Israel was part of NATO, all for one and one for all mentality applied to Israel, you are fundamentally on the losing side, and you're also fundamentally weakening your power of mediation. I mean, internally, I think that Hamas has done something that Fatah could never have done, and that is make the occupation more expensive. And I don't think that will change. I think even if Gaza is reoccupied, the occupation is more expensive. It can never return to the situation of being a sort of low-level conflict for all the reasons that that has been said. And finally, your question about normalization. I just think that whether we normalize or not has become less relevant after this explosion, because this explosion has demonstrated that normalization actually is not the issue. The issue is something completely different, as Wada and Fadi have explained. It is the central and core problem. And that is what this blow up has done. It has illustrated the absolute centrality of the Palestinian problem and the absolute irrelevance of normalization to it.
Well, thank you very, very much. I mean, also from the number of questions that I'm seeing, still 13 questions in the chat box, but unfortunately we have come to an end of our today's webinar. But as this question showed, as the level of attendees also illustrated, there is a tremendous interest in the subject. So therefore, many more webinars, many more events is justified. And I think many more dimensions still needs to be packed or unpacked. So once again, thank you very much to our speakers, David Hirsch, Wada Khanfar, Fadi Quran. And also thank you very much for all the audience, the participants, for sparing time and joining us, and also the Al-Sharq Forum teams for making this possible. So thank you very much, and hope to see you soon for another event. Assalamu alaikum.
Here's everyone.